Oh, and good evening. It's May 27th, 2025, and we're continuing our discussion collection in our Outside the Class series. This series from the Bible Project covers the entire TaNaK, also known as the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. All of those source videos are available for your review on TheDustyFeet.com in the Outside the Class section. You know, the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to that in-class lecture first. We try to keep these to about 15 minutes or so. Make them easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but maybe with a fun and maybe different twist. Our hope with the Dusty Feed is to foster discussion and help build and support communities. If you are not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Facebook, at The Dusty Feet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And 3. We have a Discord channel. The invite link is there below. Be vocal, be written, be loving. And 4, and as always, you are welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated, and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, so we need to click the subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that is when you click that like button, because it is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So in this series, like I said, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK in the order of the Hebrew Scriptures, right? Because that's the original order of this collection. Just we need to remember that the videos we're going to be discussing, just tip of the iceberg, they're part of a learning series that I highly recommend, and all of them can be found on the Bible Project website. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? Well, we'll see. So Samuel, first scroll, so part 6. So let's start with this. I want to reread a verse. I want to take a step back because I mentioned a number. It was an odd one. It was not even or odd. It was just unusual. What we've heard are in our stories, there are groups of men, right? Such as 3,000 men, 7,000 men, 10,000 men. They're just simply large numbers of people. But then in this verse, we get something a little different. Definitely not usual to the pattern we've been seeing. Again, in verse 19 in chapter 6. And he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. And then God struck down all of the people, 50,070 men, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. So here's one of those interesting little examples of what something might look like. I know you've heard me read it. Sometimes it helps to look at it, but sometimes we're not trained to listen for that. But the number 70 is significant in Hebrew Scripture. It's often used with some things associated with the leadership of God. The number 70 is one of those things that maybe we should probably take a note of, maybe examine. Because you're familiar with the original 70 elders, that's back with Moses. Council of 70, well, that's much later leadership grouping. So when you look at this number and you see 50,070 men, it sounds a little odd. It's a very detailed number. I mean, did they make a count? Were there actually 70 extra people? Or more likely, does that include 50,000 people, large group, and that included the elders or the leadership? Because there's an inference to that group that's included with this number. Just, I guess, something to think about ourselves. There can be these things in Scripture that we're not overtly aware of. But that's the fun of starting to dig into things. Find some of these things and notice these little details that often, when we're reading, sometimes we just glance over because we're not taught to look at these things. They're just numbers. So they sent for Levites in a neighboring town, Kiriath Jearim, and they brought the ark there. They consecrated Eleazar as the priest to oversee the ark and remained there 20 years. So another interesting part when we think about what's loaded in that statement, the ark's there. I mean, it's not like the ark is going to be sitting on display. So they had to bring the tabernacle from Shiloh to Kiriath Jearim so that the ark could be placed in its rightful location. I know sometimes you can understand a story and it becomes interesting when you examine things like these because there's a single sentence that can fill in so much more of a picture, because we should probably have had this in our heads. I think it's probably up for discussion amongst ourselves, regarding when we get to these points, these things can be found in Scripture. Perhaps when we're discussing those pictures, then maybe we can consider what different people see when they hear words like these and other ones in Scripture. Loaded verses. By the time we get to chapter 7, Samuel now is what I might term, he's in full flight. He's in full air, right? Meaning now he's more in the scroll. He's taking very active tone, especially after what's happened. Samuel begins to instruct them. And here he's saying something that maybe this is what they should be listening to and doing, and then maybe how a battle can be won. So verse 3, chapter 7, when then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all your heart, remove the foreign gods and the Asheroth from among you, and direct your hearts to the Lord, serve him alone, he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So the sons of Israel removed the Baals and the Asheroth, and they served the Lord alone. Then Samuel said, gather all Israel in Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. Something that we don't see often, again, these loaded statements, are when it says that they've turned and they're serving the Lord. It doesn't give a time frame. It doesn't say how long. I'm not compelled that it's a single day. Like they tore down the Asheroth, removed the idols, and they said, we're going to follow you, God. And so they're like, okay, great. That was a busy day, but we're done and we can do this. I think underneath there's a inferred reference of time. We don't know what it is. It's not repetitive in that nature. But I think it's something we need to look at. It's not a one and done statement. It is a pattern showing that you've turned to the Lord. Yeah. So Samuel sets up an altar, offers a sacrifice to God, a burnt offering to the Lord. I think the wording in the verse is interesting because I'm going to read you the two verses. You'll see a point where we come across a phrase that says, and then the Lord answered him. Because he'd been praying. The following sentences, they provide a mental image of something entirely different from the story we've been reading before. How to do a battle. So Samuel took a suckling lamb, offered it for a whole burnt offering to the Lord, and then Samuel cried to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. Samuel offered the burnt offering, and the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines, and it confused them so that they were routed before Israel. So we get a picture of how God can win in battles, and where they won't be able to take any responsibility, meaning they won't say, we did it, it was our timing, we came up with our might, our strength, this was our idea. this pattern's very different. Samuel realizes this, and he does something interesting. It's spiritual, but it's also physical. I bring this up because it's an interesting point. Because they sometimes in Scripture, they'll put up a marker, a stone marker, right? Meaning they build up a stone edifice, a marker designed to serve as a reminder. The purpose of the stone or stones is that when you pass by, you're going to share the story, or maybe those around the stone are going to share the story. Maybe they'll say, this is here because fill in the story moment. Yeah. Because Scripture often reminds us to remember. Actually, it reminds us of these places, but especially to remember. Remember, we remember, sounds repetitive, for many reasons. Two of the biggies are that something good happened here. We need to remember that. And or something not so good happened here. But we need to remember that as well. Samuel 7, verse 12. Then Samuel took a stone, and he set it between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer. Heard that name before. And he said, thus far, the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued. They did not come any more within the border of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron even to Gath, and Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. So there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Now Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. You know, it's interesting when we read that last verse, 7:15. It sounds like we just wrapped up the story, right? Just like the story of Samuel's all bound up. We've been reading this in past, right? Samuel's been judging Israel all the days of his life. And we get to that ending with several judges, and then it provides a time frame for the duration of service. But here, it's not just a few years. It's rather his entire life of service. That's a slightly different twist. However, okay, so what's going to truly propel us from this point on in the story, we're only in chapter 7 with Samuel, is that Samuel becomes intertwined intricately with the kings. In other words, a new development's about to occur. A judge is about to prepare Israel for the next step in its life. And it's going to involve establishing a king. I think what fascinates me about these stories is the way that God causes and allows things to happen. And his interaction is evident on both sides, right? That is, he'll cause something, and then he'll say, this is what I'm doing directly, including selling you to the Philistines, but also is leaving you to our own choices, our own devices. And then he'll throw in his take. Because we're going to get into it here, because they're asking for a king. As the children of Israel are pleading for a king, oddly enough, one of the arguments is that it's like the rest of the nations. God's like, okay, I'll give you a king. And the man he chooses, like the judges before in the selection, well, being chosen is one thing. What you do with it, how you choose to live it, that's the story, isn't it? These are the stories that we read. These are the stories that we listen to. These are the stories that we reflect upon. It's the choices of the people in these stories, whether commoner or king, it's ours to hear the story. So we're arriving at this part of the story, and we're ready to transition to Israel, where they ask for a king. But then we get this brief glimpse in how Samuel conducted his affairs as a judge. It just caught my eye because we don't often receive this kind of explanation about other ones. except maybe sometimes mention their being in their town and that there was judging going on. But in the case of Samuel, we learn that he was, I think perhaps today we'd call it a circuit judge, because Samuel went around, was seen by the people, was more actively involved, at least from the story of the judges we've seen in the past. I think Samuel he's shown us an example of actually being out and about. In verse 16, and he used to go annually on a circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then in his return to Ramah, for his house was there, and there he judged Israel. And he built an altar to the Lord. So it seems Samuel took his job very seriously. He kept God at the forefront, including, even at home, building an altar for him to offer his special offerings when he chose to do so to God, and to intercede on their behalf to God. So in our next episode, we're going to get into yes for a king. Well, God says, I'll give you a king. We'll see. So thanks for joining us tonight for another episode of the First Scroll of Samuel, Part 6, on Outside the Class, on the Dusty Feet.